Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. And welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ashley from Arena International, and I'll be your host. It is our pleasure to have Bridgeline with us today, who will be presenting this webinar titled Top 5 Conversion Strategies for an Amazon-like Customer Experience. Today's guest speaker is Jonathan Meyer, Senior Solutions Engineer at HawkSearch by Bridgeline. Now, I'll provide some housekeeping information before we start. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar platform. You'll notice that this webinar is browser-based, so if you disconnect for any reason, please just click on the link that you received via email to rejoin the session. To ask questions during this presentation, you can send them via the Q&A widget. Just click on the button called Ask a Question at the bottom of the screen, type your questions into the box, and click Submit. We will allocate some time at the end of the session to address any questions or thoughts that you may have. Even if your question doesn't get answered today, it will be available to be answered later on. And now, please allow me to welcome Jonathan. Over to you.
Thanks, Ashley. That was a wonderful introduction. And thanks for hosting us here. We're very excited to have this conversation today, covering the top 5 conversion strategies for an Amazon-like customer experience. You did a quick little introduction for myself, but I'll give everyone here a little bit more information about me. Again, my name is Jonathan Meyer. I'm one of the senior solutions engineers for the Bridgeline team. I've worked primarily with the HawkSearch tool, though, for the last 8.5 years. So I've got some experience in the search and e-commerce space. And so over that time, we've kind of learned a lot about kind of what everyone's looking for, what are the things that really can drive those conversions. And, when you think about a lot of this, it comes back to what is everyone looking at? And that's going to be, of course, Amazon. And that's kind of the gold standard that everyone thinks about of, we'd like to be more like Amazon. We'd like to get a little piece of that puzzle, a little piece of that pie, I should say. And so what does that actually look like? So that's going to be the topic of this conversation today. We'll give you a little summary here. We always like to kind of, lay out what you can expect to gain, the knowledge you can gain from this session. So really 4 major topics that we'll cover here, 4 major bullet points, I should say. Well, there's going to be 5 different strategies, but 4 major bullet points here. Really, we're going to talk a lot about the machine learning and automation up front. We're going to talk about recommendations and personalization as well. Those are key topics in terms of delivering that Amazon-like functionality. Everyone on this call and on this webinar, I assume, has interacted with Amazon in some capacity. So if you're familiar with that concept of, you're landing on those product detail pages, you're getting those recommendations, you're getting lots of kind of other areas where those conversion opportunities are being presented for you. But there's other ways where you can actually kind of step up and go even further with that functionality. And really that's going to be leading into segmentation and personas, and also making sure that the data issue, that we can solve for some of that, and we can make sure that we're getting the right products back in front of the visitors when they are interacting with that search box. So lots of good information that we're going to be covering today, lots of cool topics that we're going to be diving into. So let's get into it. So we're going to start first with the wisdom of the crowd. And this is, of course, an aspect of machine learning. And wisdom of the crowd, if you think about that, that's really going to be one of those kind of your kind of standard, almost like your expected recommendations functionality. You're looking at this product, we're going to go ahead and use the wisdom of the crowd to make suggestions for a common strategy like we're seeing here is customers also bought. Learning from what interactions other visitors are taking on the site to inform the other suggestions that should be made. This is functionality that's been around for a while, but in the search and e-commerce space, this is something that is now being more brought down to being available for everyone here. So if we look at some examples here, this is an example where someone is buying a storage drawer, and a very common thing is to leverage then the steps that a visitor has taken on the site, and then understand, well, what are other customers buying together with this? And you can use these signals to drive these kind of recommendation strategies where it can help improve those conversions because you're presenting the common items that are being bought together. So in this case here, we're buying a modular drawer in white. We can see that this is also commonly used for, hamper functionality. So this is used in like laundry rooms where people might be putting their hampers together. This is using garment racks where people might be hanging things to dry. So we can see that based off of what other visitors are doing, these suggestions are being made. The important thing to keep in mind here is that this is something that a business user, a marketer, a merchandiser, this is not something that someone had to come into and make these relationships. This is using that wisdom of the crowd, understanding what everyone's interactions are on the site as it relates to that particular product. So that we can use those signals to say, well, when someone has looked at this modular drawer in white, they have then also bought that spiral hamper gray room essentials product. Using those signals, we're able to go ahead and understand those relationships and then make these suggestions happen as part of the kind of carousel display that you might commonly see. Another great example here is an idea of when we're looking at fabric. So this doesn't just need to be related to kind of one of the things we want to make sure that we're stressing here is that this isn't just um, only specific to one kind of industry. Really, every industry can benefit from being able to leverage this kind of wisdom of the crowd approach here. So now we're looking at a different kind of product set here. This is a fabric company that is using recommendations to help improve their conversion rates. And here we can see that we're looking at some red matte satin fabric. And so they're using, again, that wisdom of the crowd to make suggestions for other products that are being commonly bought together. And this is, again, leveraging those signals that are happening behind the scenes. So using, what visitors are looking at, what visitors are adding to cart, and being able to leverage those suggestions to bring back in these recommendations here. One thing to also note about these kind of strategies is that this doesn't need to just be the labeling here that we're seeing of people also bought. That's a common way to phrase a recommendation strategy. But behind the scenes, there can actually be several different things happening that are leveraging that kind of wisdom of the crowd strategy. So it's commonly thought of as, well, we're going to look at this product and then tracking the visitors they've moved along their journey and seeing what else was bought together. But these could be also things that customers also viewed. That's another common wisdom of the crowd strategy when we're talking about, well, if you're looking at this product, what other products have you viewed? Also added to cart instead of just bought. So kind of that next step before the actual purchase and conversion. That can be another good strategy to look into in terms of, well, I have now added this to my cart. Maybe I haven't actually pulled the trigger here. Actually, in this case here, the add to cart screen that we're at, this kind of transaction, this step that I have taken in my journey on a website here, I have indicated to you that I am looking to actually purchase this product. That can then be used behind the scenes to inform these other strategies. And again, that's another wisdom of the crowd strategy, because you're taking that idea of, you've indicated to us by adding this to your shopping cart that you're interested in this product. We can use those kinds of signals then to look at kind of in aggregate, what is everyone else doing with this product, to also inform this. So while those recommendation strategies that we're seeing here might be labeled from the front end on the actual UI as people also bought, behind the scenes, there can be multiple different strategies being used in addition to that kind of, well, conversion aspect of, these are products that have also been bought together, but also these are products that may be also added to the same shopping cart as the product that you're currently looking at, or these are products that were also viewed when looking at this particular product. So using those other signals to really help give you a holistic uh, suggestion pool to pull from. If we move into our next example here, we have some jeans that someone was looking at, and you can see those other ideas being brought to the forefront here. We can see that this is very clearly labeling these strategies as also viewed and then bought after viewing this. The bought after viewing is actually a really interesting one, because what this is doing is taking that next step. Also viewed, as we were just talking about, is another idea of kind of wisdom of the crowd. When you are looking at the actual, you've looked at this product, and then what else in that session have you looked at to make those relationships. And again, the main benefit that we want to stress here to people that are looking to get into this kind of space is that this is then all kind of hands off. This is using those signals from your visitors on your site and building out those relationships automatically to help understand what are the things that we want to make suggestions for here. So in this example, we had viewed the women's Simply Stretch mid-rise boot cut jean, and then other products that were also viewed from other visitors on the site were the Levi Women's 724 high-rise straight jean, and some other ones that are also included here. This is using those signals of what have visitors looked at, what have other visitors looked at in the same sessions, to build out those suggestions that we're seeing here. The next step that we're seeing here, and what's also, again, to highlight this, a really unique kind of addition to that, is that bought after view, meaning that these are other things that were also viewed. So that taking that next step on that customer journey, but then actually did lead to those conversions. This is an example, again, of leveraging that wisdom of the crowd. It is kind of just taking the next step on that customer journey and really layering it back into the recommendations of, well, we know what customers have also bought and we know what customers have also viewed. Let's marry those two ideas together and start making suggestions for what if customers also viewed and then bought. Gets really specific and drives some really great kind of hyper specific recommendations that don't require a business user or marketer or merchandiser to establish those relationships, because it is telling a visitor, hey, you might be looking at this and maybe this isn't exactly meeting what you're looking for out of this product. It's a very kind of common use case when we think about how visitors interact with commerce sites, is to look at a product. You might be doing some research on it. You might not be ready to necessarily pull the trigger on buying that. You might be looking for alternatives. Maybe this product is currently out of stock. We know this is something we'll get into a little bit more, but supply constraints are a big concern for a lot of vendors online right now. And so we want to be able to provide suggestions for alternatives, suggestions that the visitors can be confident and kind of where that's going to lead them to, that this is going to be a good product. And if there's a issue of being out of stock, or if I'm looking for alternatives, the language that we're using here of also viewed is important, because that does indicate to a visitor on the site that this is something that I might also be interested in. But bought after viewing is a even stronger signal to say, hey, this is something that we believe is really going to be appropriate for you. And again, from a business perspective, this is an easy lift, because it's just taking advantage of all of the signals that you're already getting from your visitors on the site. But I do want to make sure that we're not just speaking about this from an e-commerce perspective and from a transactional perspective, because we do know that we have a wide audience here on this call, in this webinar today, and we're happy that we can speak to such a broad audience. But think about the machine learning and kind of the wisdom of the crowd approach for articles and for content. So if we're talking about blog posts, we're talking about events, we're talking about news and articles. Here you can see an example of a higher education facility that is using the wisdom of the crowd to make suggestions for related news and articles based off of what I have done on the site here. So I'm looking at the master gardener kind of topic of interest here. There's a lot of kind of core information. And then we're using that wisdom of the crowd to say, well, what are the other news and articles that have been looked at from this perspective? And being able to really kind of make those suggestions, so that as a visitor's on this site, you want to kind of, from a content perspective, the goal is to get the right information in front of them and continue to give them the right information, so that they can naturally flow from one end of the experience to the other. If I've started at the master gardener kind of top level, and I maybe want to float down then into how to transplant irises, that might be a thing that I'm then interested in from this perspective. And we can learn from, well, when visitors have been on that master gardener page, where have they then navigated to? What's kind of that next step? Again, when you think about this from a content perspective, it's the same kind of methodology behind the scenes of, well, what if customers also viewed, customers also bought? But the concepts are just slightly different in terms of, well, when we're looking at also viewed, it's not what other products have they also viewed, it's what other content have they also viewed. When we're thinking about also bought, well, that can be, did they actually click into that? Did they actually download that PDF, sign up for that event? Those other kind of signals can be wired into this wisdom of the crowd learning, machine learning, to make these suggestions. Really can be very dynamic and really help kind of drive really great kind of experience and get closer to that Amazon-like kind of functionality. And by presenting these kind of conversion opportunities, you can help improve, obviously, your bottom line. But if we think about the recommendations from a kind of carousel functionality we've been showing you so far, something that I do want to kind of highlight from the HawkSearch end, obviously we're here to kind of give you broad, good information that is applicable kind of outside of just the HawkSearch ecosystem. But I would be remiss if I did not also highlight that one of the main benefits of our tool here is that we can take those kinds of machine learning wisdom of the crowd signals and use that not only for kind of the recommendation carousels that you're seeing in the previous examples, but also use that logic to help improve the search functionality. So when we're returning in those search results, you go into the search box, you throw in that you're looking for, a women's red dress, you're looking for a jacket, you're looking for, some copper wire, whatever you might be looking for. You're looking for how to transplant irises. We can use the search results that are being returned and obviously still provide the good relevancy there that you would expect from a site search solution. But we can then also filter those through the wisdom of the crowd kind of machine learning by taking advantage of the learning search multiplier, which tracks what our visitors actually engaging with and selecting, that kind of also viewed signal. Taking advantage of the add to cart multiplier, which then of course tracks that next step on that customer journey of, do they then indicate this is something they're interested in? Are they, signing up for that event, so on and so forth? Are they adding that product to their shopping cart? And then, of course, last but not least, the actual order information. So, does that lead to a conversion? Did they actually sign up for that event? We can use those signals from the crowd to help improve the actual search results so that the items that are added to cart, that are leading to conversions, that are being interacted with, float up more naturally towards the top of the results. So, it can be a good benefit for everyone there. But there is another kind of concept that we want to cover here: wisdom content. So, if we were talking about wisdom of the crowd being tracking what interactions your visitors are doing, well, what is wisdom of the content doing when we're thinking about this from machine learning perspective? Well, what we're doing in this regard here is we're actually using all of the information that you have from a search perspective. You think about if someone is going to do a keyword search, they're going to throw in specific attributes they're looking for, the style of the product, the color of the product, the gender. In this case here, we're looking at an example of like some bottles that might have caps that are associated with it. We want to make sure that we're using the content from the product. So let's give you an example here. If we jump over to our next slide here, we're looking at a site that sells hockey equipment. And so we have navigated into the product detail page here for a composite hockey stick. You'll notice several things about this, and this can be kind of from a per product perspective, from a content perspective. We're thinking about, well, what's the wisdom of the content? This particular hockey stick that we're looking at has several pieces of information that are important to it. One is obviously the brand name. We've got that Bauer Nexus E5 Pro grip. That is the brand name. That is the style of the product as well. We also, of course, know that it is a hockey stick. But you'll notice that last little bit there on the product name, senior. That is indicating the division this is for. So this is not for your youth hockey league. This is not for your high school hockey league. This is for your adults out playing hockey. And so the senior is an important division. It is an important classifier of what am I looking at. And so we want to use the wisdom of the content to make suggestions for this that honor kind of all of the pieces of information that we know. It can be really intelligent suggestions automatically being built out by just using the wisdom of the content. Well, in this example here, you can see the carousel is then suggesting other hockey sticks. Well, of course, we know that if you're looking at hockey sticks, you might be looking for alternatives. So we're going to use that wisdom of the content to suggest other hockey sticks. But in this kind of industry, what's important to the visitors on this site is there's a lot of brand loyalty. So you want to make sure that you're making suggestions primarily, if you can, from other hockey sticks that are from the same brand. And then, of course, kind of the thing that needs to be honored is the division, because you wouldn't want to be suggesting that youth hockey sticks for someone who is currently looking for a senior hockey stick. It's not going to be applicable. It's going to be an irrelevant suggestion. So by using the wisdom of the content here in this example, we can take advantage of the fact that we know all of this information about this product, the brand of it, the division that it is in, and of course, obviously, what kind of product it is that we're looking at. And using that content, we can then say, well, let's make suggestions for similar items that meet all of those specific criteria and kind of ranking those in terms of ordering there. You'll notice that the first three products that are being returned here are from the Bauer brand name. And even the first two are from that kind of sub brand of the Bauer Nexus brand. You'll also notice that, of course, all four of these are highlighted from the senior division. So we're kind of meeting that first, the absolute must match criteria of this needs to be from the senior division. That is, of course, all matching against all four of those there. The first three are matched against the brand. The first two are matched against the sub brand itself. And then if we don't have an additional one to match, maybe there's only three of these that meet that kind of initial condition of the brand matching, we can then start to make suggestions for other brands that don't fall off. So using the wisdom of the content, you can prioritize kind of what is most important. In this case, it needs to be obviously a hockey stick. Then it also needs to be that division of senior. And then we want to prioritize the brand name and, if possible, the sub brand of that. But if we can't start to meet that, let's start to pull in other suggestions so we can provide other alternatives that still meet the first two criteria of it needs to be obviously be a hockey stick, and we want to make sure that is matching the division that the customer is currently looking at. And this is dynamic then. So if we're looking at other products, we also then navigate away from this product into a youth division hockey stick, the suggestions here would automatically pick up on that change, know that the product that we're currently looking at meets these other criteria, and then use that to start making those suggestions. Let's give you another example here, and this one I always love because it's so very specific to the kind of the pain points that we see with this, because we work a lot in the B2B spaces as well, and I think there's some some good information that can be used there, because it can be a very complex kind of catalog of products and parts and so on. And so if we think about this example here, we're looking at an 8-ounce clear PET plastic straight-sided jar, very clearly telling us in the product name that the cap is not included. But we can know a lot of other pieces of information. Again, what is the content telling us? What's the wisdom of that content? And in this case here, it's also telling us what the cap size is, that this has a very clear cap size of 70 to 400. So we can use that information, we can use that content to help us inform what are the recommended accessories. We know that the cap is not included. So a natural thing to suggest then would be the actual caps. And then we can also make sure that those caps are going to actually fit that specific jar, because we know what the cap size is. Again, the content is telling us this information. We can use those signals to inform. And as you can see here from the recommended accessories, we have that first custom label, which I'll come back to in just a second. But the next three suggestions there are all 70 to 400 caps that will fit this particular jar that we're looking at. And this is, again, using that wisdom of the content that's not being set up by a marketer or a merchandiser. No one's coming into the tool and saying, okay, well, when you're looking at this jar, make sure you're showing these particular caps. It's just using the logic of what's the product that we're looking at. We know the cap's not included. If the cap's not included, make sure that you're showing caps as the accessory. Those caps then need to fit the size of the cap, that the cap size that fits this particular jar. Just kind of logic based there, using the content to understand what makes the most relevant suggestions. We'll come back to that add custom label because that is an important distinction, but I'll touch very quickly on the compare similar items recommendations widget that you see down there at the bottom, because this is, again, using that content to make suggestions for alternatives. So just like we were kind of showing you for the hockey stick example there, these are going to use other values here. So maybe this isn't tied to the size in this case, but it could be, you might be looking for other clear PET plastic jars. Maybe they're slightly different in style, slightly different in size. You can use different signals to say what's the important value that we should use to make those similar suggestions. Just to give you another example, kind of similar to the hockey stick example, but using different criteria. So I've kind of teased this add custom label thing here. Let me actually go ahead and talk about that. One of the things that I do want to be clear, and that any kind of good recommendations tool should be able to provide for you, is the ability to add in kind of specific things that you would like to see. So in this example here, we're looking at a client who sells jars and bottles and things like that. They recently rolled out a whole new custom label functionality. You think about it, if you're buying a jar or a bottle or something like that, what's the next thing you're most likely to want to do with that? Well, it's going to be to put a label on that. This company recognized the gap in their business, and were expanded into that new product line, and they rolled out this new custom label. But it was something that, their visitors didn't know that they offered. And so we're able to use the recommendations tool to not only drive the accessories that are using machine learning and using that wisdom of the crowd, but there is also the ability to market and merchandise within that to say, okay, we want to make sure that there's this particular thing we want our visitors to see now, because they might not be aware of it. It doesn't necessarily follow the logic of the other recommendation strategy of, we're showing caps that match the particular bottle size. In this case, it is a specific example of, they want to say, we want to show this when we're looking at recommended accessories for our visitors, so they know now that we're offering this product. So just make sure when you're looking at kind of recommendations tools that they can do these kinds of things, because this is possible, leveraging that kind of wisdom of the content to drive really informed, very clear suggestions that match really specific data points of your product catalog, while also still giving you the ability to step in and say, we want to create our own kind of merchandising and wrap it within that recommendations bubble, because it gives it a different feel to the visitor on the site than, a marketing banner or a kind of call out to say, hey, here's our spotlighted item. When it's wrapped into these kind of accessories, it has a different connotation to the visitors that makes it a much more natural kind of add-on to the process of, oh, I do need to buy this cap for this, but I was also going to look for that custom label. I was going to go to another site to buy that custom label. Now I can see that this is available right here. Kind of makes that whole kind of just puts it all into one big package, makes it very easy for the visitor. So there's, we want to also make sure that we're talking about, not just the commerce examples here. So we're going to look at an example that I think is really unique. And this is using a blog post in this case. In this case, we're working with a party supply kind of novelty company. And they have a whole kind of catalog of blog posts and articles that they write to give you kind of design ideas. And so using recommendations in this regard to say, well, here's this great blog post that, we're getting ready for Halloween. This obviously is a little bit older screenshot here, where we're getting ready for Halloween, and we've written out this great blog post of these different design and DIY ideas to throw kind of a Sleeping Beauty Halloween party, but obviously making it a little bit more spooky. And so using the recommendations then to understand, well, we're looking for kind of party supplies that are in the Halloween category that meet certain criteria for, they need to be vintage. We're looking for that kind of old world kind of theme. And so you can see the suggestions then that the recommendations tool is using here is looking at kind of the tags that this has been associated with in this particular blog post. So using data that's not even necessarily like explicitly defined, we can use kind of informed ideas of this is got a Halloween theme. This is this is tagged in the data of this blog post, entirely unrelated to kind of the actual content of the product catalog. There's no explicit candelabra 3-arm piece here that we're going to be suggesting. We're making those suggestions based off of the fact that we know that this is in this particular category of content with these particular tags associated with it. The tool can then use that content to understand, well, here are the products that we want to recommend along with that. And of course, the kind of the most I think what everyone kind of thinks of when they think of the Amazon kind of personalization recommendations is that personalization. We've given you several different examples there of kind of how you can do the more classic kind of customers also bought, and how we can take that to the next level with that wisdom of the content, where you can really start to make very intelligent suggestions without having to step in. But the classic kind of use case is that AI driven personalization. And so what we're thinking about with this from kind of a search and e-commerce perspective is that the first example you're seeing there that you may also like, really tailoring the suggestions that are being returned based off of the individual visitor to say, we know that this is John that's browsing the site. We know that this is Susan that's browsing the site, and using those signals to provide different kinds of suggestions based off of what John has searched on, what John has navigated to, what John has looked at, what John has purchased in the past, and using all those same signals for Susan to say, well, we know what Susan has searched for, what Susan has looked at, what Susan has added to cart, what Susan has purchased, and using those to say, well, we know that John prefers blue colored items when Susan prefers red colored items. And so when we're making those suggestions then from the personalization end, you get that kind of specific you may also like. But that can also factor into geographic regioning, something that we'll talk about even more in depth as we move into a later conversation. But also keep in mind that that is another area of personalization that we can discuss. So one of the cool things about what's happening in this space here is that personalization used to be really only a tool that was available for kind of your big players, your Amazons, your Spotify's, your Netflixes. These are, and this also speaks to kind of the benefit of personalization is this idea of we've all kind of come to expect it. And you can, I think in probably your own personal interactions with the internet nowadays, you kind of come to when you're on Spotify, you go to that Discover Weekly. You're looking for those personalized playlists that are being generated specifically for you. And same thing on Netflix. I think they focus so much on that now that it's become second nature to just kind of browse for what they think you're going to be interested in because they have so much other content to offer you. Unless you're specifically looking for something that you are looking for, that oh, someone told me I should go look at that. You start with that list of what are they suggesting for you? What does Netflix think is going to be important? And so this speaks to both the importance of personalization, but also kind of highlights one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that how this has really only been a tool for those larger players in this space. But now we can start thinking about this for kind of your for everyone on this call, being able to leverage that personalization here. And so just some other examples that we think of when we're talking about personalization is an example you see here of this just for you. Again, this can be layered in on a homepage. This can take advantage of several different kinds of strategies when we're thinking about what does a personalization mean. Well, there is that kind of understanding of what a visitor's actually, again, searched for, navigated towards, looked at, purchased. But we can also look at making suggestions from what have they recently viewed, and then again leveraging that idea of most visitors when they're on a site are maybe doing some research, looking at several different products, comparing and contrasting. We can use that recently viewed to make suggestions from there. Also, the idea here of order history to make suggestions for let's in a B2B environment. This is a huge functionality to be able to say, we know what you have recently ordered. You can, more commonly than not in this B2B space, you're coming back to reorder the same things. We can use that kind of personalization to say, oh, hey, we know that it's Susan. She's back here. She's ready to place that monthly order for their office supplies here. Let's go ahead and show all that same information there. And so we're talking about other ideas of personalization. It's not just that kind of the navigation choices that someone has made to kind of pull out of the machine learning what should be suggested here, but leveraging those ideas of like recently viewed. And so you can see some examples here of pulling back in that personalization and say, well, we know that this is John who's browsing the site versus Susan, and what has Susan browsed through? What is versus what has John browsed through? And this can be a good way to kind of immediately re-engage someone too when they come to your site. We see this as kind of, if you think about some best practices that we like to bring to the table here when having these conversations with our clients, is where does it make sense to deploy these kinds of different strategies? We've talked a lot about kind of those interstitials that we were showing there with the fabric, and how we have the add to cart functionality, and where is this all being layered in here. Something like recently viewed and this personalization is always great to get in front of the visitor as soon as possible. Your homepage, you're layering this into the actual search box when someone clicks into that, pulling back in that personalization at that point, because it helps them kind of pick up from where they left off. Maybe they were doing that research previously, they looked at several products, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to need to come back here. Maybe they ran out of time, or they just were going to do some other offline research. When they come back to your site, they interact with it again, hit them right away with those recently viewed items. It's a great way to re-engage with them, and if they're now ready to make that purchase, you can get them to that product that much quicker. But we want to talk about some other areas outside of kind of the recommendations area where we think can really help kind of step up that get to that Amazon like conversion functionality. And one of the things that I think is not discussed enough is the idea of segmentations and personas. Um, so taking that concept of personalization and kind of breaking it out into a bigger bucket of, we want to segment the experience. So we've got our nice little stock photo there of all these different plates that are, you maybe have a personal style for which kind of plate you'd like to use, but they also have segmentation layered into them so you can get the right products in front of them. So what do we mean by this? Let's make this a little bit more practical here. We are talking about kind of the different industries that someone might be in. So I'm looking in the automotive space, regional availability in terms of what location are you coming from, and then also, are there any kind of brand limitations? Do we need to make sure that this brand is only available in certain locations? And so we need to make sure that either based off of who the visitor is, again, what industry are they in? We will make sure we're showing the right products for that industry. What location are they coming into from? We will make sure that we're showing products that are available in that location. And then also, of course, understanding any kind of brand availability. Do they have access to all of the products that we're offering within that subsection of the catalog? Or do we need to remove certain ones based either off of who the visitor is or where they're coming from? There's a lot of kind of complexity to this kind of functionality. You might also commonly hear this referred to not as segmentation, but as entitlements, really making sure that the visitor is entitled to certain sets of results. We want to make sure that we talk about that, because it's a good way to really kind of step above the normal search experience and really get closer to that, that, again, Amazon-like functionality here. So what do we mean by this, to kind of provide some initial examples here? We've got a kind of a mock-up of a more electrical distribution site here. I've gone to the site, I've done a search for sensor, and you can see that this is both honoring the fact that I am logged in. So I've logged in here as Susan, and this is then also informing the pickup branch that I'm looking at. So these are results that are available in Seattle to show back in those specific 10 results. If we take a look back at the other kinds of ends of this, so what does this mean for different visitors who are logged in? Well, we can see in the first example here that I'm now logged in as Steve. We are then logged in as Susan on the second example here. And then this is also informing the price differences. So this is something else that we also want to think about from an entitlement, is not just making sure the right set of results are being returned and from what location, but understanding the differences between different visitors and making sure that the right results are not just the right results, but also the right information about those results are being returned here. So in the use case for Steve, you can see that we've got $61.99 for the first product, whereas the second product there for Susan is, I'm sorry, for the first product for Susan is $65.99. So we're talking about a $4 difference in price based off of the fact of who's logged in. That's a really important thing to be able to return and understand about this entitlement and about this segmentation, is that this is Steve, this is Susan. This is, again, another idea of that kind of personalization there. And so we also want to make sure that we're talking about supply constraints. We were talking a little bit about this earlier when we were thinking about making suggestions for similar or alternative products. One way to help kind of combat this is to make sure that, well, when we're at the search bar, when we're on the search results themselves, that we're getting them the correct product. So, again, to bring this back to that kind of Amazon-like functionality, it's very common. I know I do it all the time. as I will filter through, well, what are the products that have that kind of prime delivery? I want to make sure it's something that I can get with that free shipping, and with in that certain time frame. So being able to make sure that filtering by these different criteria, and especially in the B2B space, and really even some in the B2C space, we've seen this issue with supply constraints. And so being able to use that information to not only return in the right set of results, but to filter against that. So in this example here, you can see that we currently do not have that in-stock pickup at branch toggled on, and we have 10 results. Now, are, of course, still logged in as Susan. We are still looking at our Seattle pickup branch. If we go into that, though, and we do toggle on now, that in-stock pickup at branch, we are now only showing the 6 relevant results that are currently physically available for me to go into that Seattle branch location and pick that up as me being Susan. This is really important information to be able to drive for your visitors. If there is a concern about availability at different locations, different warehouses, being able to just even segment against, is this in stock or out of stock? You want to be able to drive that functionality so that when a visitor is looking at those search results, they can be kind of as accurate as possible. And speaking of accuracy, we want to talk about organizing your disjointed data. And I love this image because it shows kind of the complexity of a lot of data that we see in this space here, where we have different sizes for these different wrenches that we're looking at here. We're dealing with fractions here. We could be dealing with imperial to metric conversions as well. And so what we want to talk about from the search perspective with this is making sure that kind of how a visitor searches and what your data actually says is more uniform. So what do I mean by that? Well, in the kind of mock-ups that we have here, you can see that we've provided a search for a 3.5-inch exhaust, and we're getting no results. Meanwhile, if I was to do the same search for a 3.5-inch, but spelled out this time, INCH, versus the double quotation abbreviation exhaust, we're actually getting back in results. This is a disconnect. This is using the problem is that their data in this case here has the product data as spelled out as 3.5 INCH, not with the double quotation. So searching on the double quotation version gets you no results, while searching for it spelled out in full does return results. But as human beings, we look at those searches as being the same term. Your average visitor isn't going to know the difference of, oh, well, maybe I should try searching in inch, INCH, versus the double quotation, or maybe I need to spell it INCHES because that's what the data says. Or also to say nothing of the inconsistencies that you can have in your data, where maybe some of your products are referring to this as INCH, some of them are referring to it as IN, some of them are referring to it as double quotation. How do you then return the right set of results for a visitor if there is all that disconnection in your data? So let's give you an actual. Let's actually skip over to the next slide here because we can get a more practical example. So this is an example of a client, Crescent Electric. They're using HawkSearch to drive their search results, and I actually should step back a little bit and also highlight that this unit of measurement conversion that we're talking about here. This is not to get too salesy, but this is something that is very unique to the HawkSearch tool. We've put a lot of effort into solving for this by using a lot of pattern recognition and building out kind of custom libraries that understand what these values are, because it is a very powerful tool to help kind of solve for both ends of this equation here. To say, in this case, I've put in a search term for 6 INCHES PVC NCAP, and you can see from within the autocomplete there that we are matching against 3 products. But you'll notice that within those 3 products, the term INCHES actually doesn't appear in any of the product descriptions. It is INCH or using that double quotation abbreviation. So this solves for both how the visitor has searched for it and also for the variance in how the product data might be stored. And it's able to return the same set of results kind of regardless of those values, so that you can be confident of, well, maybe we don't have the best data. And this is actually something that even Amazon struggles with, is that if you ever start doing more complex, kind of longer keyword searches in Amazon, it can really quickly start to break down. Because we're so focused on this kind of search experience here, we've been able to build out this functionality to help solve for this. Or in this use case here, you can see that we're starting to match against both the discrepancies in the product data and also the discrepancies in how a visitor might search on it. But we can even do some more cool things with this, because when we start to understand kind of, well, what's the relationship between all these different units of measurement, and also how are these unit of measurements being submitted here, you'll notice that in this example, we've done a search for a half-foot PVC end cap. Now, I know we're working maybe with some international audience members here, so to think about the imperial system versus the metric here, obviously in a foot there are 12 inches. So if I'm looking for half of a foot, we're going to be looking for 6 inches. And again, the tool here understands those relationships and is able to pull back in that same set of results. So you'll notice that while we're using a fraction, which is also something else that can trip up a lot of search engines, we're using 1/2 as that fraction there. We're using foot as our unit of measurement. The results that we're returning are accurate still, even though the terminology is not the same here, where we have more products that are 6 inches. And here again, we can see that we're going from a fully spelled out term of foot to those abbreviations of double quotations, and then also INCHES being spelled out, from going from a fraction into a whole number as well. And we can, of course, also handle those differences in how a unit of measurement from a numerical value might be provided. So we showed you a whole number into a fraction, which is a very complex kind of transition, but also going from a whole number from a fraction to a decimal point and understanding what all those differences mean from how a unit of measurement might actually be searched on. In this case here, we've done that 0.5 as our numerical value, foot being abbreviated now down into FT, and then of course still the same PVC end cap, and we are getting back in those same set of results, those same 6-inch products with the double quotation, with the INCHES, even though again the search term from a keyword perspective does not match against that. From a data perspective, we understand what those relationships are and are able to go ahead and drive the same set of results. So it can be very beneficial to help kind of tackle this. Well, we've got a lot of data in our system, we've got a lot of product information, but it's not maybe the best. How can we help solve for that? The better that you can get your search results to return accurate, relevant results, kind of regardless of what the data says and regardless of how your visitors might be searching on it, the better you can get to those kind of conversions. And this can also be used from a navigation perspective. So another really common pain point that we see in a data perspective is this idea of having really inconsistent kind of data. You see here in this example on the left hand side, we've got length listed out in imperial, and we're seeing kind of it's not organized in any kind of fashion. We're starting off with 12, then we're going to 15, then we're going all the way back down to 3.94, then to 5.5. So it's not in any kind of logical ordering there. And if we look in the example on the right, we've got 2 different examples of height being returned here. So we've got stool seating height of 15 to 19 inches at the very top, and at the bottom, we've got the stool seat height listed again in a different range of short, meaning 16 to 23. So if I'm looking for a particular seat height for a stool, which is the right one that I would select in that regard to find the product that I'm looking for? Do I need to select both? Should I only select one of them? What if I'm falling right in the middle there of those ranges where I'm looking for a 22-inch seat height? I would need to select 2 on the top one and 1 on the bottom. Is that going to give me the best set of results? It's a mess, is basically what we're trying to talk about there. So how do we fix for that? Well, we can use that same kind of unit of measurement values along with a lot of other tools that we have in the back end to help understand the patterns that we're seeing there and fix up that data so that it becomes a much cleaner example for your users to navigate through those results. So when they're doing those keyword searches, the important thing is to not only return the right relevant results and layering all of that machine learning that we also talked about earlier, but to also make sure those navigation options are consistent and clean and clear to navigate through by standardizing the ordering of those values in terms of largest to high, smallest to biggest. Also standardizing kind of the various data points as well. This says seating height in grouping, and this other one is listed as short, not in actual inch values. What does all that mean in standardizing it? As well as being able to clean up data like we're seeing here in the pattern replacement over here on the left-hand side, where we've got values that have lowercase, uppercase, all uppercase, a combination of a mix. That's not a very clean way to navigate through that. It looks dirty. It's not a pleasant experience. Being able to use that kind of pattern recognition to clean that up and make that all very uniform. We can also do this just for kind of all values in general. If we wanted to create a consistent experience of having this all uppercase or all lowercase, we can also clean that data in that fashion. So, bunch of information that we just kind of covered for everyone there. Hopefully, to provide a little recap and just kind of touch on those different points, we did discuss how that machine learning and automation can get the right products to your visitors by talking about kind of the wisdom of the crowd, the wisdom of the content, really leveraging those ideas to make sure that the right products are being returned. To help drive those conversions, using the AI and the personalization to also help inform those recommendations. So, what am I personally going to be interested in from a recommendation perspective? Leveraging what I've recently viewed, what I've recently searched for, to also drive those personalizations. We talked about segmentations and personas, how we can leverage the different locations that someone might be in, the different kind of companies that someone might be in, who individually is logged in, understanding then also what does this mean from a is this in stock or out of stock level to help drive the right set of results. And then, of course, last but definitely not least, is being able to help standardize and clean up that dirty data by using kind of pattern recognition, understanding those unit of measurement conversions, and being able to make sure that we're returning in the right set of results from a search perspective, as well as helping make sure that those facets and filters, those navigation options, are clean and clear so that a visitor can very quickly get to the products that they're looking for. Hopefully you guys have found a lot of good information out of this presentation, but we also make sure that, if there are any questions that you guys have for me, I'll go ahead and pass it back over to Ashley, see if we have any questions from the chat, and I'll be more than happy to help answer any ones that pop up.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for that presentation. Just a reminder for the audience to ask questions. You can send them via the Q&A widget. Just click on the button called Ask a Question at the bottom of your screen, type your questions into the box, and click Submit. Even if your question doesn't get answered today, it will be available to be answered later. And it looks like we've got several questions already. First question is, how big of a catalog is needed to take advantage of the unit of measurement conversion you showed?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. The size of the catalog really isn't the issue there, because we've seen this kind of time and time again. Even if a client has super clean data and is a smaller catalog of products, it really is solving for also just kind of how your users, how your visitors, your customers are going to be searching on that data. So it's not a matter of how big or how small or how dirty our individual data is, which is definitely a kind of an aspect of what that unit of measurement conversion can do. But it is also solving for how are your visitors going to be searching for that data. So it's a good question. Definitely understand where the line of thinking is there. That, oh, we need, we don't have that big of a catalog and our data isn't that dirty. It does help solve for kind of the searching aspect of, instead of having to create a bunch of kind of like rules to synonyms with the source entries to make sure that you're getting back in the right results. We can handle this from, the visitor searching on this, your data, regardless of kind of the size or complexity there, has these variations. Here's what should be returned. So definitely not a problem, not something to really factor into. It really comes down to how are your visitors searching as well.
Okay, next question. We're in the aftermarket parts industry. How would we see the benefits of machine learning and AI in our industry?
Oh, yeah. And we work a lot in that space. One of the things I hopefully try to communicate here with this presentation is that, search doesn't need to just be a B2B kind of functionality, or even just a B2C. It can be, I'm sorry, those values reversed. Search doesn't need to just be a B2C experience, or even just a B2B. It can be also obviously for content. But to speak specifically to this question here, in that B2B kind of aftermarket, parts catalogs, we see actually a big benefit for it. So if you think back to those examples that we were showing earlier of the caps and the bottles, that is a real world example of a client who has a very complex catalog of products that it has both parts and the actual products themselves, and using the logic there from that machine learning to automatically make those suggestions for, you're looking at this, here's whatever, here's what should go along with that, without having to build out those relationships manually, which is kind of how you had to do it in the past. We see a huge benefit in that parts catalog space. Maybe there's discontinued parts that you want to make suggestions for the current replacement part for that. Again, that can be handled using the kind of recommendations functionality that we have on hand here, to make sure that the right products are being returned in that more B2B experience.
Okay. I'm used to seeing recommendations in B2C sites. Where does it fit in the B2B?
Yeah, that's actually maybe a little bit of a redundant answer here, but just like we were talking about there, it is leveraging the product data to really drive those specific recommendations for that B2B environment. It is one of those areas where we think the B2B spaces have been lagging behind. Just to, it's I think in general, it's kind of the standard there is that, B2C has kind of been plowing, moving ahead and kind of really pushing forward with a lot of the technology and delivering these kind of functionalities. And then B2B comes in a few years later and is kind of picking up the slack there. And I think one of the things that has lagged even behind further than that is this, well, we don't need to do recommendations. We don't need to do, really worry about any of the machine learning or anything like that. Because our catalog is so complex. Our visitors have so many different rules. And really what I hope to kind of help explain through this presentation here was that there is a lot that can be done in that space. If there's something else to take away from this, it is that you can leverage that machine learning, you can leverage those recommendations, because it is now technically advanced enough to handle those complex catalogs and those parts catalogs, and make sure that we're making relevant suggestions, not based off of just kind of that wisdom of the crowd, but also really that wisdom of the content piece speaks a lot to that.
Okay, that was the last question. Thank you very much for that presentation again. And just a reminder to the audience, you can still send any questions while watching on demand. All unanswered questions and future questions sent will be answered at a later date. I'd like to thank Jonathan for his presentation and Bridgeline for sponsoring this session. To the attendees, you will receive an email telling you how you can access the on-demand version of this webinar. Or you can access this through our website, which is www.arena-international.com. We look forward to sharing further webinars with you, so please do keep an eye on the website just mentioned. Thank you once again, and I all hope you have a nice day.